the year 2025 emerges as a pivotal moment in global history, where decades of escalating tensions between two nuclear superpowers reach their ultimate crescendo. The relationship between the United States and Russia, already strained by years of proxy conflicts, cyber warfare, and competing spheres of influence, faces its most dangerous test since the Cuban Missile Crisis. What began as diplomatic disagreements over Ukraine's sovereignty has evolved into a comprehensive confrontation that threatens to reshape the world order permanently. The roots of this conflict stretch back through years of mounting grievances and strategic miscalculations. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 marked a fundamental shift in post-Cold War dynamics, forcing the United States and NATO allies to confront a reality they had hoped was relegated to history. By 2025, the Ukrainian conflict has become a grinding war of attrition, with over 790,000 Russian casualties according to U.S. officials, while some estimates place the figure even higher. The prolonged conflict has drained both Russian and Western resources, creating a dangerous situation where miscalculation could spark a broader confrontation. The economic dimension of this rivalry has proven equally destructive. Over 16,000 sanctions have been imposed on Russian individuals and entities by early 2024, making Russia the most sanctioned country in the world. Yet these economic weapons have failed to achieve their intended strategic objectives. Russia's economy, rather than collapsing under the weight of international isolation, has adapted and evolved. The nation's GDP growth is projected to exceed both the European Union and United States for the second consecutive year, demonstrating the resilience of an economy that has learned to operate under extreme pressure. This economic resilience stems from Russia's strategic pivot toward alternative markets and partnerships. China, India, and other nations have maintained or even expanded their economic relationships with Moscow, creating parallel financial systems that bypass Western-dominated institutions. The ruble, despite initial volatility, has stabilized through strict capital controls and energy export revenues. Russia's defense spending has surged to $149 billion in 2024, representing a 38% increase driven by the demands of the Ukrainian conflict and the need to modernize military capabilities for potential broader confrontation. The technological battlefield has become equally intense, with both nations investing heavily in next-generation weapon systems that could determine the outcome of any future conflict. Russia has gained a significant advantage in hypersonic weapons technology, having already deployed and used its Kinzhal hypersonic missile system against Ukrainian targets. These weapons, capable of traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 5 with unpredictable flight paths, represent a fundamental challenge to existing missile defense systems. The United States, despite extensive research and development programs, has yet to deploy operational hypersonic weapons, creating a temporary but critical capability gap. The hypersonic weapons race illustrates broader shifts in military technology that favor speed, stealth, and unpredictability over traditional defensive measures. Russian systems like the Zircon missile, now being integrated into the Su-57 fifth-generation fighter aircraft, provide strike capabilities that can reach targets within minutes of launch. These weapons operate at altitudes and speeds that make interception extremely difficult with current defense technologies, effectively neutralizing traditional missile defense systems that both nations have spent decades perfecting. American military planners have responded with accelerated development programs aimed at closing the hypersonic gap. The Navy's conventional prompt strike system is scheduled for deployment aboard ships by 2025, while the Air Force pursues its own hypersonic capabilities. However, American hypersonic weapons differ fundamentally from their Russian counterparts in being designed primarily for conventional rather than nuclear payloads. This design philosophy reflects different strategic doctrines but also creates technical challenges requiring greater accuracy and more sophisticated guidance systems. The space domain has emerged as another critical battleground where both nations seek decisive advantages. Russia's anti-satellite capabilities pose direct threats to American military communications, navigation, and intelligence gathering systems that have become integral to modern warfare. The potential for conflict to extend beyond Earth's atmosphere represents a new dimension of strategic competition, where the destruction of key satellites could blind military forces and disrupt civilian infrastructure on a global scale. Cyber warfare capabilities on both sides have reached unprecedented sophistication, with state-sponsored hacking groups regularly probing and infiltrating critical infrastructure systems. Russia's cyber arsenal includes proven capabilities for disrupting power grids, financial systems, and communication networks, as demonstrated through attacks on Ukraine and previous operations against Western targets. The NotPetya cyber attack alone caused billions of dollars in global damage, illustrating the potential for cyber weapons to inflict strategic-level harm without conventional military action. American cyber capabilities, while less publicly demonstrated, are believed to be equally formidable. U.S. Cyber Command has developed offensive capabilities targeting Russian infrastructure and military systems, though recent policy changes under the Trump administration have reportedly halted some defensive cyber activities against Russia. This decision has created concern among security professionals, who view continuous cyber deterrence as essential for preventing large-scale attacks on American infrastructure. The Arctic region has become a new frontier for strategic competition, with both nations recognizing its growing importance due to climate change and accessible natural resources. Russia has established extensive military infrastructure across its Arctic territories, including modernized bases and advanced missile systems that can project power across the region. These installations provide Russia with strategic advantages in terms of homeland defense and control over newly accessible shipping routes and energy reserves. American Arctic strategy has evolved to address this Russian buildup, but significant capability gaps remain. The United States lacks the extensive Arctic infrastructure that Russia has developed over decades, limiting American ability to project sustained power in the region. Recent discussions about Greenland's strategic importance reflect American concerns about being outflanked in the Arctic, where Russian forces maintain near-continuous operations and have developed specialized equipment and tactics for polar warfare. The naval dimension of this rivalry extends far beyond the Arctic, encompassing global competition for maritime dominance. Recent submarine deployments by President Trump, moving nuclear-capable vessels to appropriate regions near Russia, demonstrate the continued importance of undersea warfare capabilities. Both nations maintain extensive submarine fleets capable of launching nuclear missiles from concealed positions, creating a constant state of mutual vulnerability that paradoxically both stabilizes and destabilizes the strategic relationship. Russian naval capabilities have been significantly enhanced through modernization programs focusing on advanced submarine designs and hypersonic missile systems. The integration of Zircon missiles onto various platforms, including submarines and surface vessels, provides Russia with the ability to strike high-value targets at ranges and speeds that challenge existing defensive systems. American naval responses include advanced attack submarines and missile defense systems, but the effectiveness of these capabilities against hypersonic threats remains largely theoretical. The alliance structures surrounding both nations add layers of complexity to potential conflict scenarios. NATO's expansion eastward has been a consistent source of Russian concern, with Moscow viewing the alliance's growth as an existential threat to Russian security interests. The addition of Finland and Sweden to NATO membership has extended the alliance's borders directly adjacent to Russia, creating new strategic realities that both sides must navigate carefully. Russian responses to NATO expansion have included the deployment of advanced missile systems to Kaliningrad and other strategic locations, effectively creating anti-access zones that complicate NATO military planning. These defensive measures, combined with Russia's demonstrated willingness to use military force against neighboring countries, have created a security environment where miscalculation could rapidly escalate into broader conflict. The economic interdependencies that once served as stabilizing factors in U.S.-Russia relations have largely been severed through the sanctions regime and Russian countermeasures. Energy relationships that once provided both nations with mutual benefits have been replaced by economic warfare that has restructured global energy markets. Russia's pivot toward Asian markets for its energy exports has reduced European influence while creating new dependencies that could complicate any future conflict resolution. American allies in Europe have borne significant costs from the breakdown in Russian economic relationships, particularly regarding energy security and supply chain disruptions. These costs have created internal political pressures within NATO countries that complicate unified responses to Russian actions. The economic pain experienced by European populations due to higher energy costs and supply shortages provides Russia with leverage that extends beyond pure military considerations. The nuclear dimension of US-Russia competition remains the most dangerous aspect of their rivalry. Both nations possess approximately 87% of the world's nuclear weapons, with Russia maintaining 5,459 warheads compared to America's 5,177, according to 2025 estimates. This rough parity in nuclear capabilities creates a strategic balance where neither side can achieve decisive advantage through nuclear threats alone, yet the existence of these arsenals makes any conflict between the nations potentially catastrophic. Recent developments in nuclear doctrine on both sides have lowered thresholds for nuclear weapon use in certain scenarios. Russia's military doctrine includes provisions for nuclear weapons use in response to existential threats to the Russian state, while American nuclear posture has evolved to address new categories of threats including cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. These doctrinal changes reflect the blurring of boundaries between conventional and nuclear warfare in an era of diverse and sophisticated military capabilities. The human dimension of this conflict extends far beyond military casualties to encompass millions of civilians whose lives have been disrupted by the broader strategic competition. Ukrainian refugees number in the millions, while sanctions and counter-sanctions have affected economic opportunities and living standards across multiple continents. The psychological impact of living under the constant threat of nuclear conflict has influenced political decisions and social movements worldwide. Regional conflicts in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia have become proxy battlegrounds where American and Russian interests clash through local partners and mercenary forces. Russia's Wagner Group and similar organizations have extended Russian influence across Africa, while American military advisors and contractors support different factions in the same regions. These proxy conflicts create multiple potential flashpoints where local disputes could escalate into direct superpower confrontation. The information warfare dimension of US-Russia competition has transformed how both nations understand and respond to threats. Russian disinformation campaigns have targeted American electoral processes, social cohesion, and trust in governmental institutions. These efforts have achieved significant success in polarizing American society and undermining confidence in democratic processes. American counter-efforts have focused on exposing Russian activities and building resilience against information manipulation, but the effectiveness of these defensive measures remains contested. Social media platforms have become battlegrounds where state-sponsored actors from both nations attempt to influence public opinion and political processes. The global reach of these platforms means that information warfare tactics developed for domestic purposes inevitably affect international audiences and relationships. The difficulty of distinguishing between legitimate political discourse and foreign manipulation has complicated democratic governance in multiple countries. Military recruitment and retention issues in both nations reflect the broader societal impacts of prolonged strategic competition. Russia has faced significant challenges in maintaining military personnel levels due to casualties in Ukraine and domestic resistance to mobilization efforts. The United States confronts different but related challenges as military service becomes less attractive to young Americans who question the value of overseas commitments and potential conflicts. Technological development in both nations has been increasingly focused on military applications, with civilian research and development taking secondary priority. This militarization of technological advancement has implications for long-term economic competitiveness and scientific progress. The brain drain from civilian sectors to military research has affected innovation in areas like medicine, environmental science, and consumer technology. International institutions have struggled to manage the breakdown in US-Russia cooperation, with organizations like the United Nations Security Council effectively paralyzed by vetoes from both permanent members. This institutional failure has forced other nations to develop alternative frameworks for addressing global challenges, potentially leading to a more fragmented international system where regional powers play larger roles in maintaining stability. The environmental consequences of military buildup and potential conflict between the superpowers extend beyond immediate battlefield damage to include resource consumption, pollution from military activities, and the opportunity costs of diverting resources from climate change mitigation efforts. The carbon footprint of military operations and weapons production represents a significant but often overlooked contribution to global environmental challenges. Energy security has become intertwined with national security in ways that complicate both domestic policy and international relations. American efforts to reduce dependence on fossil fuels conflict with the reality that military operations remain heavily dependent on traditional energy sources. Russian energy exports provide leverage in international relationships, but also create vulnerabilities as global energy transitions accelerate. The financial costs of military competition have reached levels that strain both national budgets and economic growth. American defense spending exceeds $800 billion annually, while Russian military expenditures, though smaller in absolute terms, represent a larger percentage of GDP and create more significant opportunity costs for civilian development. These fiscal burdens limit both nations' abilities to address domestic challenges and invest in long-term competitiveness. Intelligence services on both sides have expanded their activities to encompass not only traditional espionage but also economic intelligence, cyber operations, and influence campaigns. The blurring of boundaries between intelligence gathering and active measures has created situations where intelligence activities themselves become sources of conflict rather than tools for managing competition.